If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, our guest is Dr. Shaun McAlmont. He's the president and CEO of industry-leading cybersecurity awareness training company, Ninjio. Shaun is considered a pioneer in the online education industry and has served at both publicly traded companies and high-growth private firms. Shaun, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us today.
Hey,
would you mind giving us, our audience, just a little bit more context of your experience and your background and why you're so excited to join the team at Ninjio?
Yeah, Arnette, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be a part of this this podcast. My background spans workforce development, education technology, and as you mentioned, online learning. But most importantly, I've got a focus over the last 10 years or so on adult learning and corporate training. And so with that, as you also mentioned, I've led public and private companies in all aspects of training and workforce development. I've got a bachelor's degree from BYU in psychology, a master's degree in education, and I've got a doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania in higher education and adult learning. At Ninjio, I think one of the reasons that I was sort of led and interested in this particular field is that originally lots of cybersecurity awareness efforts related to the technology side. How do we develop a great technology platform that has great security, that protects it, and a firewall? And that's where a lot of the original efforts began. I think what we learned very quickly is if a firewall lets certain elements of breaches go through, there are employees on the other side that become, at that point, the weaker link. And so my efforts have been related to creating a human firewall, if you will.
Yeah.
Strengthening the individual employee and helping them understand what a risk is, how they could personally put themselves, their families, or a company at risk. And so I've taken essentially my learning and training and how adults learn, and we're applying it to how we train a workforce to reduce risk.
Yeah. At S2 Verify, one of the key services we're providing to our clients is insight on a particular candidate. And there are oftentimes behaviors and criminal activity that might suggest problems in this area. But as we look at the broader context of employees, what is the number one reason why employees fall prey to these, scams and these attacks? And because as I fully appreciate it, it's the employee that really kind of opens the door. And why don't you share some insight about that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Arnette. Employees are susceptible to receiving information or prompts and acting on them. We always ask for immediate response from our employees, and depending on who's sending the prompt or the email or the text, we respond in different ways. So some employees are motivated by power or a fear of power. Your boss sends you something at 4 o'clock and says, get this done right away. Click this link below for more information, and you click that link. Some are motivated by financial, prompts and an opportunity to earn more or learn how to earn more. And so whatever those prompts are, it forces an employee at times to make a decision to click these links and respond to emails that could be fraudulent. This can also happen at your home. So I think that ultimately, the reason employees fall for these attacks is some personal motivation to respond to a prompt that looks familiar to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe that's how bad actors, or cyber criminals, if you will, are inducing employees to open up the firewall, if you will, for bad actors.
You know, a couple of years ago, I know there was a prevalent scam where they would target the CFOs of industries, and they'd send a note as it was coming from the CEO or leader of the company, and say, "Hey, I need 5,000 sent to this account right away," or some scam like that. And to your point, unsuspecting employees in these positions that have that authority to grant access and transfer funds, they believe they're doing the right thing to accommodate a need of the business. And in reality, they just get sucked into the scam itself. So
yeah, absolutely. That's called spear phishing.
right.
So what ends up happening is a bad actor will get into your system and they'll go dormant. They'll just watch the interaction between employees in the background. So they learn who communicates with the CFO, who actually has access to the bank accounts and can generate wires, and then they'll mimic those positions of authority. And so that type of very focused spear phishing is extremely prevalent, and now those numbers are up in the millions. So they're sending a note from the CFO. Employees then are sending wires in the millions of dollars. Luckily, at times banks catch that, but sometimes they don't. And so it is really an issue that's getting worse.
Yeah. So as we look at the world of cybercrime and cyber criminals, is there a profile or a framework that you can offer our audience about these individuals, and frankly, what is the most common way you've seen where they try to penetrate organizations?
Yeah, Arnette, these are bad actors. They're out for financial gain in one way, shape, or form, and they're taking a shortcut. They are not really worried about the ramifications of their actions, and they're finding that people are sometimes paying the ransom, or they're able to, as we said earlier, induce an employee to do something fraudulent. With this said, I think one of the ways they get in is by guessing passwords.
Yeah.
They really are figuring out, sometimes through social media, what the world is around an employee, and guessing. And so if the password is too simple, like it's your name and your date of birth, or your mom's name and date of birth, whatever it is, those combinations are really easily guessable today. So employees are now encouraged to have passphrases versus passwords, and those passphrases, it could be something like, "I love walks in the park," 45%, and using a variety of character variations, uppercase, lowercase, and other types of punctuation. And so it's very difficult to guess a passphrase versus passwords. And so they're getting smarter and smarter. And so I think even the most common ways that they've been in to systems are getting more complex. And it's really detrimental. There was a breach recently at the Los Angeles Unified School District, and I'm not sure how they got into the LA Unified system, but they wanted a ransom. LA Unified said, "We're not paying the ransom," and so they released information of all of those young people into the dark web. And middle schoolers who haven't even started living their life yet. So these folks, they're out for financial gain, and they don't have a conscience about what they're doing. It's very, very important components to remember here about their motivation.
Yeah. So in the context of cybersecurity, and given your expertise, what do you think the difference between training and learning, those two issues there? What can we share with our audience about what's the best approach here?
It's interesting. I think we learn about new concepts. So we teach people, and then we as end users or individuals learn a new concept. And so we understand the why and how something, we learn about the benefits and risks, and it's all contextual. So it's just like in athletics, we typically talk about athletic training, but the training comes after you learn about the concept. So a coach might say, look, we're going to learn about a new concept today in whatever sport it is. And here's why, here's how it benefits you and the team. And then we're going to train on that element. So it's really similar in that we sometimes provide a context for the employees so they understand the risks to the company and their individual role. And the difference becomes how we train them to become better in that context. We train them to build strength in that understanding, and then we practice the new habits, ultimately trying to change their behavior. So again, learning is broad, training becomes specific, and it's all about changing behavior over time.
Yeah, and I also recognize how you just talked about the athletic side of things. It's also my understanding from your early background, you were quite the athlete yourself. And what area did you work in?
I was in, I went to a school called BYU, Brigham Young University, as a student athlete. So I went on a scholarship for track and football, but I ended up just being on the track team. And I ran also internationally in track and field. And I was a hurdler and sprinter. So it's very, very, you're kind of similar here in terms of learning and training. Training about how to clear a barrier at full speed was very, very important. You can learn the concept, but you have to train on that to really get the behavior down, to become expert in it. And that's the same thing we're doing here.
Exactly. So it's interesting that the frequency and consistency of training for an athlete transcends to that for what you're trying to teach employees of cybersecurity, because there needs to be frequency and consistency in the training. Talk about that a little more, about why that's important in this space.
It's thanks for making that connection. We're not born natural cybersecurity experts, and some athletes are not born with all the speed in the world or all the strength, but we can teach and train to gain best practices. And so frequency is really, really important. Many of us, and Arnette, you might agree with this or not, we don't like to do the corporate training. You know what? We're through schooling, we get to work, and all of a sudden we've got to take more tests and assessments, and we don't like it. So companies are sometimes offering that training once a year. You see it coming on your calendar. It's a 1 or 2 hour training on cybersecurity or sexual harassment or workplace behavior, and you're regretting it. So sometimes you take it, you keep the window open to do your assessment and training, but you've got another window open on your computer where you're actually doing work. You figure out what the minimum to pass is, and that's how we've gotten through corporate training for many, many years. But you can imagine you're not really learning and you're not practicing it at that moment. You're just trying to get through it. That's not changing behavior. So what we've done at Ninjio is we've provided an approach that it's episodic. So that means we send an episode every month. It's 5 minutes. We've got a Hollywood writer, so we add drama to it. They're animated. And so we try to keep engagement, we keep frequency, and most importantly, we tie it to a real cyber security issue, breach, or risk in the industry. So as adults, we learn through case studies, like tell me what happened so I can learn from that and move forward. And so we try to do that in those short episodes. But the most important part is we send one every month, keep someone's frequency of learning up.
Yeah, I understand that is a best practice of monthly training and education. And that I recently saw a Gallup poll that talked about employee engagement rates, and that they are dismally low right now. They're somewhere just a little over 20%. What perspective do you have on how workplace education can bring these rates up?
Sometimes I'll tell you, engagement comes sometimes after a breach, unfortunately. So sometimes there's a hard lesson learned that forces a company to do something more aggressive in their training. But I think sometimes the message needs to come from the top. This is from the board, the C-suite, et cetera, that because technology is so pervasive, it's a part of everything we do. We have to see breaches or technology risks as a major risk to all organizations, families, and individuals. So I really think it needs to become mission-driven and aligned in every part of the organization. It's almost got to be an initiative for a company for their long-term success. And so, every part of the organization plays a role. I think sometimes the IT or the chief information officer or even the chief information security officer, it really comes from the entire organization top down.
Yeah, yeah. So, in that area, that's a great point, which is the education in this space should not be just dedicated to the senior people or to people that use the computers most. It really should be targeted to every single employee, from the receptionist to the CEO. What's your perspective on that?
I agree 100%. The window that's open, I think you mentioned it, like you open the door into your company's technology back end, it's indiscriminate, but whether it's the CEO that does it or a receptionist. So I reiterate, I think leadership has to make it a priority. I believe that, with employees working remotely and VPN access and all of those things, it's becoming even more prevalent. I think that sometimes the C-suite can be the worst offenders. They don't always go through the training. They don't always understand all of the details, and they can click some of those links faster than anybody. So it really is across the board. And I think sometimes you can change that culture by making it mission-driven, having reward and recognition, and keeping it positive, but also having the engagement high.
Yeah. So and that leads right into the next question I had, which was around culture of an organization. What's the best way to instill cybersecurity into the culture of the organization? And what are kind of core requirements around that?
I think almost every time a CEO or leader of a company stands up to speak, they can talk about the fact that the technology is changing the way we operate. Tied to that is reducing the risk that technology advancement can bring. And that needs to be critical, because it can bring a company to its knees if you're not really looking at it that way. So culturally, it's a level of awareness of the risks and the pros and cons of doing this right or wrong. In addition to that, going right back to ongoing training, frequency and engagement is critical. I think a regular reporting of how the company's doing, how employees are doing in their efforts, and just that hierarchical flow through the organization of that information. So they're always hearing it. They know it's important to leadership. They know it's important to their own manager, and they can be recognized for their positive efforts. And by the way, it's what we're trying to do with Ninjio with reporting, how we identify actions on the part of employees based on the simulated phishing that we do. Mm-hmm. They're responding to and why, and then can we tie the training to those responses or those profiles of behavior, and then reporting on it over time so we see how the risk is reduced. But I think that's how you change the culture of an organization around that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Shaun, thank you so much for your useful insights and perspective today. I know many of our audience members are probably changing their passwords now, trying to get them to a phrase. But before I let you go, I have one more question. And I want to know, if S2 Verify were to run a background check on you today, what would be our most surprising discovery?
Oh man, I've had a lot of background checks done over time, Arnette, and I think it's a part of life, career, professionalism, et cetera. And I think for me, the background check might show some interesting places I've lived. But I think it probably also shows a commitment to lifelong learning. You'll see that, I've got a bachelor's degree, master's, and doctorate done over a 20-year period. And so I think that, I kind of put my money where my mouth is in terms of education and training. And you'd see that in the background for sure.
Well, that's wonderful. So tell our audience where they can find more about you and specifically Ninjio and how they can learn more about the great service you guys are bringing to the industries today.
Arnette, thank you. I would just go to ninjio.com and you can take a look at some of our episodes, how we do things. You'll learn more about the company, myself and our founder. And I think it's a great place to start. But more than anything, I appreciate this opportunity to talk about cybersecurity awareness and training. In particular, I think it's becoming more of a regular part of our lives and work. And I think what you're doing here is a service to everyone. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And thanks again, Shaun, for joining me today. And this is a great way for us to kick off a new year and 2023 and all of the information we want to bring to our audience about employment, education, training, and getting the right members of your team. And thank you to all of you listening, watching, or reading. Please tune in to our next episode when I will be joined by Ryan Cleveland from Spotter Staffing. And it goes without saying, let's get America back to work, because dreams only work if we do.
If you want to stay abreast of HR, recruiting, and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.